Welcome you guys, I'm Drea with Aloha Plant Life, and today we are doing video number 2 in my little Watering 101 series that I'm putting together for you guys. If you haven't checked out the first video yet, that's fine. You can feel free to do so anytime. We did cover the basics of watering in that video, about the different types of water available for use and when to use them, and also the 2 basic methods for watering your plants and when to use them and pros and cons of each. So today we're going to move on and we are going to cover underwatering. And I will let you know ahead of time that the next video after this in this series will cover overwatering. So we're going to get both of those topics out of the way here this week. So with underwatering, well, let's back up. People basically fall into 2 categories. You're either a chronic underwaterer or you're a chronic overwaterer. It's kind of like people fall into 2 basic categories when it comes to trailing plants. You either like to let your plants trail or you like to let them climb up poles. But with watering, it's not really a preference like it is with the trailing plants thing. It's just something that is inherently what we do. It's built into us, who knows why, but I'm gonna take some guesses when we cover this in this video today as to what a lot of the reasons are that certain people are more likely to be an underwaterer than an overwaterer. So what is underwatering? Well, there's actually 2 different types of underwatering. When I think of underwatering, I actually think you're going way too long in between watering your plants. So your plant needed to be watered a week ago and you aren't watering it until 2 weeks from now, right? That's chronic, drastic underwatering. That is what I typically think of when I think of underwatering. However, it is possible to underwater your plants when watering them on the correct schedule for that plant. And not to say that there is a schedule, there's not a schedule, guys, for plants. It just depends on the plant, but you'll start to learn your plants. And if you know you have to water this plant once every 1.5 weeks, and you're watering it once every 1.5 weeks, but it's still showing signs of underwatering, then sometimes that means what you're doing is you're not giving it enough water at the times that you're watering it. So you're not soaking it totally through. That is also underwatering. So why do we underwater? Why do people underwater? Why do only certain people underwater? I actually think it boils down mostly to lifestyle. I think a lot of people who underwater are just very busy and they don't have a lot of time to be tending to their plants and they get forgetful about them. It's also possible that you just have so many plants that you forget about some of them and it's just too much and too time consuming to go around as often as you need to make sure nobody's getting underwatered. These are the primary things that I see with underwatering. It is also possible that you're so fearful of overwatering that you always end up underwatering. That's another thing I see. And we're going to talk about ways to kind of fix that and change that and get to the goal, guys, is really not to fall into either category. You don't want to fall in the underwater category. You don't want to fall in the overwatering category. Our goal is to come to the I am a normal waterer, right? And sometimes maybe I get a little over on 1 or 2 plants or under on 1 or 2 plants, but I've got this down. That's the goal here. That's what I'm trying to help you with. So if you're doing the other type of underwatering where you're not watering your plant enough, that is usually, well, I say usually, it could be you're just not giving it enough water, and we'll discuss the proper way to water to make sure that that's not happening today. But there's also some other issues that could be going on there that are kind of outside of your control and maybe you just don't really realize that they're happening. And we will discuss those in this video as well. So what happens to a plant when you underwater a plant? The more that you go without watering a plant when it's basically used up its resources, the more dehydrated a plant is going to get. It's just like you. If you don't drink enough water, you're going to start to get dehydrated and you're going to start exhibiting certain symptoms. And to be honest with you, those symptoms aren't that far off from your plant. Your plant's going to start to look fatigued. You'll start to look fatigued. You're going to start having your skin dry. You can get that sunken look on your face from not having enough hydration. Your plants are going to do the same thing. So when we talk about signs and symptoms, they are going to differ from plant to plant just because of the nature of different types of plants. But drooping is definitely a very big one. And depending on the plant, whole stems can droop or just leaves can look droopy. If whole stems are drooping, that's pretty concerning. That's a pretty desperately needing to be watered plant, but leaves can also droop. Also, leaf curling. Leaves will start to curl in on themselves when they aren't filled with enough water, when they're not plump enough. If we're talking about, say, a succulent, puckering. Puckering can start happening to those leaves where they start to look shriveled up. If you see that, that's a sign on a succulent, and they will start to get a little bit squishy and not feel as firm on a succulent. And the same thing with a lot of other plants. There's something called the taco test that you can do on plants. And the taco test means you're going to take a leaf and you're going to try to fold it into like a taco shape. And if it goes really easily, then it's probably dehydrated. If it doesn't have a lot of give to it, then it's good. Now, obviously that's not going to apply to all plants, because some plants, such as the Syngonium over here, its leaves are not that pliable, or are more pliable, I should say, to begin with. I can easily do this with this leaf, and this plant is not underwatered. It will do that anytime. But if they're stiffer leaves that are typically have that firmer feel to them, and you'll know your plants, you'll be able to tell those kind of leaves, when you start to give them that test, if you can start to make them into that taco shape, they're needing some water. There's also what I would best refer to as flaccid leaves. And this is when the leaves literally go from mostly firm, like you're seeing here, and then like the front half of the leaf will just be like drooped down, totally like this. When that happens, that's an excellent sign that you are desperately needing to water your plant. Yellowing leaves is another sign. Now, these next few that I'm going to talk about, you guys, are a little bit tricky, because when I do the overwatering video, you are going to hear me say that these also are signs of overwatering. But there's some key differences, and there's some key things to keep in mind for whether it's a sign of overwatering and whether it's a sign of underwatering. So the first one is yellowing leaves. Now, typically, if we're talking underwatering, which is what we're talking about in this video, those yellowing leaves are going to be accompanied by dryness. So if it's a yellow leaf and it's feeling dry to the touch, if it's crispy, then that's underwatering. If it's overwatered, you're not going to get that dry crispiness to it. Now keep in mind too though, plants do lose leaves just from age, old age, you know, like I say in my other videos, you shed hair, it sheds leaves. But if you're seeing multiple yellowing leaves and you're seeing some of these other signs and symptoms that I'm talking about, that means those yellow leaves are a result of underwatering. So crispy leaves in general is a sign of underwatering. And this plant I did go just a little bit too long the last time that I watered it, and it got, well, let me start over. This is a Tenanthia burl marxii, and Tenanthia is in the prayer plant family. So sometimes these plants will get crispy edges just from the water that you're using or the fact that your house isn't humid enough, but it happens just on the very, very edges. Here's an example right here. You can see that little tiny brown spot right there. That's what that is. Now, if this plant gets dehydrated and doesn't have enough water, the whole leaf edge starts to get dry and crispy, which is what happened right here. So if you see that, and it's looking a little bit yellow, but listen, you hear how dry and crispy that is? So that right there was my sign that, oh crap, I waited just a little bit too long to water this plant the last time I watered it, but then I watered it and look, it's fine, it'll be fine. That's why I'm telling you, as long as you catch it early enough, it will be fine. So that's what I'm talking about when leaves get crispy like that. Also, brown crispy leaf tips, and it's not a plant like a Maranta or a Tenanthia or a Calathea where that can happen because of the humidity level in your house and whatnot. That's another sign that perhaps you've started to go too long or gone too long without watering. So now maybe you realized, if you didn't before, that you are a chronic underwaterer, or maybe you have a few plants that you just can't seem to get it right. You always seem to be underwatering them. What can you do about it? The good news is most plants will bounce back from underwatering way better than overwatering. It is always, always better to accidentally underwater a plant than to accidentally overwater a plant. But really, it's the critical dryness stage. There's something called critical dryness with plants. And as long as you're getting them watered before they hit that critical dryness stage, they should bounce back. Now, if you keep doing that to your plant though, over a period of time, a lot of them, they're gonna get fed up. It's like just stressing them out too much. Peperomias. Peperomias are a big one. I have my little piccolo banda over here from the first watering video, and these plants are big time. You underwater them too many times in a row and they're gonna be like, I'm done, check out, drop stems, all kinds of crazy things. They just don't like it. So if you see that that's happening, you need to make a mental note to keep a closer eye on that plant. And we are going to cover some ways to help you keep better track of if you're underwatering, to help stop underwatering here in our next little section. But before we get to that critical dryness stage will kill your plant. So if you get to that critical dryness stage, what happens at that stage is not only is everything you're seeing up on the surface of your plant indicating that it's underwatered, now your roots are drying up and they're shriveling up and they're shrinking up and they're getting tinier. And when that happens, they aren't going to absorb water. If you water that plant and you think, okay, I'm gonna just soak it in there, soak it in there, soak it in there, and those roots are past the point of being able to rehydrate, plump back up and take in water, they're now just gonna be sitting and doing nothing because it's just past that critical dryness stage and it's just gonna decline. So that's what you want to avoid. You do not want to get to that critical dryness stage. You can always slip your plant out of your pot and look. You should have looked at your plant's roots at least once since you bought it anyway, so you will have an idea of what that plant's roots should look like. You can slip it out of its pot, and if it's looking like those roots are bone dry, shriveled up, you can barely see them, then you know we're probably at that critical dryness stage. And there are some things that we're going to discuss that you can try, but there's a good chance that plant might not make it back. If it's a plant you can propagate, this would be the time to do it. If it's a plant that's only propagated by division, we're just going to do these things that I'm recommending to try to hope it bounces back, but we're going to accept the fact that it may not. If we have that situation, what I will typically do, and this did happen once to me, I'm actually going to go grab that plant real quick. This is a good learning moment. All right, you guys, so this sad little thing right here is a rattlesnake calathea that I bought, and I will flash up here for you to see what it looked like when I bought it. I bought it, it looked great. I could tell it needed to be watered when I bought it, but I didn't actually take a close enough look. And I brought it home and it became very apparent very fast that that plant was bone dry, and by some miracle, it was not showing any signs on the top of the plant. I honestly am still baffled to this day about it, that there were no signs on the leaves or anything that it was critically dry, but the roots had started to shrivel up. That plant then started showing signs up top, even though I tried to water it. I tried doing what we're going to talk about here, and it hung on for a while and kept losing leaf after leaf. And then I've had this one little leaf here, and it's not perfect. You can see it's crispy on the top and it's not even a full leaf, but it's been hanging on for 8 months like this. So something about this is alive. So I keep just hanging on to it, and I'm like, maybe now that we're rolling into spring, it will bounce back. I've seen it happen with other calatheas, so I'm not throwing it away. I'm going to wait and see if it bounces back. But I water this thing like once, maybe every 2 months, because that's how long it takes this soil to dry out, because there's not any plant there. I also downsized it into a smaller pot. So these are some things you can do to try to rescue the plant. But the first thing I did was I took the plant out of its pot and I soaked it in a bowl of water. Like, I made sure the whole root ball, all of the dirt, was submerged in that water, and I let it sit there until it felt completely wet down. Then I put it back in the pot, and then I crossed my fingers and said, please let it work. That's kind of the best thing you can do. I have actually just watched a video from another YouTuber that I like, who told me, or told us, her viewers, in her video that she had let some of her plants that she had neglected sit soaking in water for 5 days until they started to show signs of life and bouncing back. I was kind of shocked by that. I honestly would be highly concerned that that would be too long to leave them in water. Once again, it will depend on the plant, because some plants can actually live in water. So those kinds of plants, yes, maybe that would be okay with. I have not tried that yet. So if you've heard that before and you've tried it and it's worked, please comment down below and let us know. I would be fascinated to find out. So once we've done that, we just sit there and we hope it's going to come back. And sometimes it will. Some plants will die down to the soil and can come back. So don't be like, oh, well, there's no point in hanging on to this, because obviously this thing's been hanging on for 8 months with this one leaf. So that's what you're going to want to do for those plants that have kind of gotten to that critical dryness stage. That's about all you can do, unfortunately. Also, if it's a high humidity plant, I would recommend putting it right on top of a humidifier, or if you have a greenhouse cabinet, put it in there to help give it a little extra moisture just in the air. I feel like it helps it when it's hit that critical dryness stage. So as far as your other plants, you want to water them as soon as you see any of those underwatering signs, and typically that's all it'll take, but you need to also fix your schedule so that you're not chronically doing it to them. But before we get into that, when you go to water them, make sure that that soil is getting evenly wet all the way through, because our other type of underwatering that we were talking about, where you weren't giving the plant maybe enough water in each watering, some of the reasons for that happen when you underwater. So when the soil gets too dry, it typically will shrink away from the sides of the pot. You go to top water that plant and all that water falls down that gap between the soil and the pot and drains out to the bottom. And now your soil hasn't actually gotten wet all the way through. In that situation, you're gonna wanna bottom water. So if you go to water these plants and that water's just running straight through, bottom water them. Set them in that water, let it sit there for a good 10 minutes at least. And you're just gonna check it. You're gonna check the top of the soil and see, is it starting to get moist? Then you're gonna wanna take it out of that water, set it aside, let any excess water drain out, and you should be good to go. I have had to leave some of my bottom watering plants where they got a little bit underwatered, sitting sometimes, depending on the size of the pot and the plant and how much dirt is there, a little bit longer than that 10 minutes I recommended. But once again, as long as you're checking the level of the soil to where it's starting to feel moist, like how far down and whatnot, just let it sit there until it gets to that point. If you're letting it sit there for a long time and it's not getting to that point, you may need to move into that soaking process that we discussed previously. So when you're watering your plants in general, and if it's not causing that issue where the water is just starting to drain straight through, just always make sure you are pouring that water on evenly around the surface of the soil. Pause for a second, let it soak in, see if it reaches the bottom and starts dripping out the drainage holes. If it doesn't, give it some more slowly. And then eventually when it starts to drip through the bottom of those drainage holes, then you know you're good. Just let it sit there, finish draining the water out, and then dump that excess water out. That is how you typically want to water your plants, to make sure that they are getting enough water in each watering. Now, as far as making sure that we are not forgetting about our plants, if that is the problem in your situation for why you are underwatering, there are some simple things that you guys can do. So obviously you're gonna wanna research your plants when you get them to see how often they need to be watered, just so you have a good idea to start, a good starting point. You're then gonna get to know your plants over time. So there could be a little, mishaps here and there in the first few months that you own the plant while you're figuring each other out, that's fine, and while they're acclimating, because they're gonna have a different watering schedule after they've gotten acclimated to your house than they typically will while they're getting acclimated. Once you kind of have an idea, some easy things you can do to make sure you're not just forgetting is, one, if you can, just walk around and look at all of your plants each day. I'm not saying you have to go in there and stick your finger in the soil to check and see if it's too dry or anything like that. At least just walk and look at them. Look and say, oh, that leaf's getting really dry. Then pick it up and say, oh crap, I need to water this plant, it's been too long. But just walk around and look for those signs of underwatering. While you're walking around, maybe mentally think back, can you remember the last time you watered that plant? Do you know you just watered it recently? Okay, great, then that plant's fine. If you can't remember when the last time you watered it was, maybe it's a good idea to pick that one up and check it out. Also, there's lots of apps out there, you guys, for tracking your watering. I think that can be really useful. Or just a notebook with a pen, mark down when you watered your plants. Now, I realize if you have a lot of plants, that might not be practical, but if you only have a few house plants, it's a good way to have a quick place to check. How long has it been since I watered this plant? You know what? Maybe I need to go check on it. Another thing, we all have phones that have the ability to set reminders and alarms that will go off. If you have plants, well, let's say you're a big succulent person, you have a lot of succulents in your house. Succulents typically only need to be watered once a month. It can be easy to forget about your succulents and realize, not realize that it's been a month already. Set a reminder that's once a month that an alarm is going to go off and say, hey, it's been 30 days since you watered your succulents. You might want to go around and check on them. And if you still are having a problem with underwatering, another thing you can do, and maybe your underwatering actually is related to the fact that you're buying plants that actually need to be watered more frequently, and you just really don't have the time, as I mentioned before, to really keep up with it. If that is the case, another thing you can consider is just bringing in plants to your home that really don't need to be watered as often, that can tolerate more of that underwatering situation, more drought tolerant houseplants. And I actually will be filming that. That will be not the next video in this series, but the one after that will be plants for the chronic underwaterer. These are some simple things that you can do, and it may be a little bit of a hassle just to get started in it, but once you've done it, you've created a habit. It's a habit that's gonna help you, and eventually you're gonna get into a routine. And really, you guys, it's about routine. Once you have figured out that routine that works best for you, you can get into that happy ground of not being an overwaterer or an underwaterer. And once again, that is our goal. So that's really all I've got for you today on underwatering. Like I said, upcoming video will be on overwatering. So if you are a chronic overwaterer, get ready because I'll be coming at you here in a few days. In the meantime, thank you for joining me again, you guys. And if you have not yet, click that like or subscribe button down below. Please do so. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next time. Aloha.